are the New York Knicks. I'm back, rocking in New York. Well, it's the Knicks. New York. We are the New York Knicks. New York. But this new season we're about to enter, the Knicks taking no shorts just like winter.
New York, New York.
New York be about the Knicks, huh?
But the best thing about New York City is
Knicks.
Everybody say go New York, go New York, go!
Hey everybody, welcome to the New York Knicks podcast, part of the Lineups Podcast Network at lineups.com, the Big Heads Media Network at bigheadsmedia.com, and Dash Radio. Go to the New York Knicks podcast.com/ticket club for 25% off an annual membership. Use code NYKP. We have a special guest today. He is Paul Knepper. He is host of the new sportsbook podcast at New Books Sports on Twitter, and he just came out with a book. It is The Knicks of the 90s, Ewing, Oakley, Starks, and the Brawlers that almost won it all. So thanks for joining us, Paul. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on, guys. I really appreciate it.
There is almost nothing Knicks related going on, and the Knicks are generally they've been depressing for a long time, so we figure it'll be great to talk to someone about the 90s when the Knicks were just awesome. So what led you to write the book about the Knicks of the 90s?
We just touched on it a little bit. You know, the Knicks are, those teams are so special to me. I really grew up on those teams and loved them. And I know so many people around my age and older who love those Knicks teams. And, you know, it's been, as you guys know, it's been a rough couple decades in Knicks land. So I think as much as those teams are loved, I think there's, on top of that, there's such a nostalgia for those teams that really grows every year because the present is so bleak. Some people more and more, I think, look back to those teams fondly, and so I figured there's a great interest in those teams, and somebody needs to write about them. So why not me?
You don't want to write about the Knicks from the aughts or the 2010s, so this makes a lot more sense. Tell me, when did you start rooting for the Knicks? I don't want to age you or date you, but when did you start rooting for them?
No, I started rooting hard Rick Pitino years. So we're talking like 87, 88 in there.
Okay. And I guess what's your early memories? Who was around then? Who were your favorite players?
Certainly Patrick.
Yeah.
I was he was there for a short time, but I was a big Rod Strickland fan.
Mm-hmm.
He was probably my guy for the couple of years he was there.
Awesome.
And frankly, we haven't had a point guard. We haven't had a point guard like him since then, who can really break down a defense like that.
There's been a lack of point guards in this team for a long, long time. Well, I guess so for Knicks fans that are out there who say, I only remember the 2000s, the 2010s, the younger fans, can you describe to them what the 90s Knicks were like?
Yeah, the 90s Knicks were, well, first of all, for starters, it was a different game. I mean, it was really a different game. And Jeff Van Gundy, I've heard say that NBA basketball now is flag football compared to tackle football. And in the 90s, they were playing tackle football. So they were tough. They were tough physically, and they were tough mentally. You know, to put it in current terms, a guy like Jimmy Butler would have been a great fit on those Knicks teams because he's got that dog in him, right? He gets after it. And the Knicks of the 90s were very much like that. They were professional. They were hardworking. They came to play every night. And as shocking as this may sound to younger fans, they were consistently good. They made the playoffs every year from 1988 through 2001. They went to the conference finals 4 times. They went to the finals twice. They were always good, and they were they were the biggest thing in New York, really, during that time period.
So the current Knicks fans, this sounds strange to have a 15-year run where the Knicks were just a good team in the playoffs every year, contending every year. Since that time, they've been to playoffs like 3 times, have been a joke of an organization. I hate this current. I don't necessarily want to go back in time and for any other reason. I don't need to relive the 90s for any other reason, but I would love to relive an era where the Knicks were just good every season. But I want to go back to one second. You mentioned how it was a different game back then. What, in your mind, what basketball do you like better? Do you like the tough foul? Like, that was an era where, like, if to get a flagrant foul, you have to actually like decapitate someone. It was real fouls, no flopping. It was just a different kind of era and a different kind of ball. And the NBA said, we don't like this. We're going to move away from this. What do you think is more entertaining basketball? That basketball or this basketball?
Yeah, it's a tough question because I there's something about growing up in a certain era, right? I think whether it be basketball or the music we grew up with, we tend to have kind of a nostalgia for that style that we're most accustomed to. So I love that physical play. I think there are pluses and minuses. I think from a pure, aesthetic standpoint, I think it's more pleasing to watch the basketball now because it's more wide open and guys are able to, I think, demonstrate their skills a little more because they're not constantly being held and groped and jostled and, karate chopped,
Yeah.
whatever it may be. So I think it is more pleasing to the eye to watch it now, but I think there was a greater intensity back then because of the physicality of the play. So I miss some of the. I don't think you quite have the same rivalries now that you did back then. The intensity of Knicks Heat or Knicks Pacers, for example, where they played year after year in the playoffs, and it was so physical and often turned into violent that it kind of felt like the intensity was at a greater level.
It's weird how basketball's just gone, just shuts the other way. Like, on the one hand, like, I like you, grew up in the 90s. I did really enjoy that basketball. There was something about the physical play, kind of almost like it's extra manly to, like, hey, someone's going to go for a layup. We hit him hard, so he doesn't going to come for a layup again. And that's kind of cool. But I also think that, like, that also keeps the score down. You didn't have quite as high scoring games. But the iteration of basketball we have now, where, like, both teams shoot 43s, and it just becomes like dribble down, make a couple passes, throw up a 3-pointer, and then also guys are just flopping all over the court. I don't know if that's the kind of basketball I want to watch either. It's
I agree. I think it seems like they've gone too far the other way. I get opening up. I think like those Knicks Heat games where it was, 78-73 final score and it was just like a wrestling match. I think as much as I enjoyed that, I think they did need to open it up a little bit from that, but I agree. I think it swung a little too far the other way.
How do you think those Knicks would do in this era? Is it just a team that you cannot bring to this era?
Oh man, it's hard. The later years, the later 90s, they were a little more perimeter oriented, especially when Sprewell got there and they would play a point guard and Sprewell and Houston together. And so Larry Johnson at the 4, who height wise was kind of a smaller 4 and he could shoot threes. That unit, I think, could work better. The early 90s where they had like a really big lineup where you had like, Oakley or Mason at the 4 and Charles Smith at 6'10" playing the 3. I think that team would really struggle now. I don't think those teams had the shooting to really compete now. And they were just really, they were just built for a different era. They were built for a different style of play.
Do you think if we took a team like from today, the Lakers, who are probably will win the finals, but the Heat are giving them a solid matchup right now because they won the last game and it's 2-1. Do you think the Lakers going back would this Knicks team have a shot against those Lakers?
Wow. I think so. I think those Knicks teams were deeper for one. This Lakers team is very top heavy with LeBron and AD, and obviously that's a pretty impressive top. But I think they would bother them. I think Davis in particular, I don't think is accustomed to playing against big men that really get physical with you. And I think you kind of see even in this series, he's really feasted a bit without Bam Adebayo in there because Miami doesn't really have another physical big man, and I think that's the way that to get to him. So I think those Knicks teams could bother him. I mean, LeBron obviously he's LeBron. I don't know if anybody could slow him down, but I think those Knicks teams would give them a tough series.
I think it'd be an interesting matchup. I agree with you. The physical, I think LeBron would probably do fine. Even though LeBron he's amazing, but he also seems like a bit of a crybaby at times. I think he would do fine with the physicality because he's just also just a monster. He's huge. I feel like Anthony Davis. I think Mason, Oakley, they might be able to give him some issues for a guy like the Unibrow.
Yeah, and it's hard to say, but especially because he's not accustomed to playing that way, right? So I think those guys would really get him off his game and get in his head a little bit because he's just not used to that. So and you hear on the. Go ahead.
No, go.
I was just going to add, the announcers, I know Jeff Van Gundy's alluded that to a bit, that with the Lakers and Anthony Davis in particular, they need to knock him down, that they need to get more physical with him.
Yeah, I just find the rule, the foul calls sometimes are just a little too easy. And it makes such a difference. I think in game one, didn't Bam have a bunch of fouls really early on and just kind of threw off that whole game? I guess getting back to the Knicks though. So which of the teams was your favorite of that era? I mean, obviously they had two teams that went to the finals. What was your favorite Knicks team?
Yeah, that 93, 94. Of course, 94 they went to the finals. They lost in Game 7. And the 93 team was really good, really tough as well, and fell just short against Jordan and the Bulls in the conference finals. But they may have been just as good. I mean, some of the guys from that team told me they thought they would have been better than the team that went to the finals in 94. So those couple of years.
Do you think Patrick Ewing gets too much crap from Knicks fans? I guess now people look back on him and I don't think he gets the way other teams will look back at their great players as these really amazing gods almost. I think Patrick Ewing is not as respected as he should be. What do you think about that? Do you think the Knicks fans really treat Patrick Ewing the way he should be?
I agree with you, and the crazy thing is, I think it's gotten a lot better too. I think he's a lot more respected now than he was when he first, when he first hung up his jersey. Because I think people look back at now, they're like, oh man, we were really good for a long time.
He was so dominant.
Yeah, certainly when he was here, it's incredible. It's incredible how little he was appreciated while he was here, for sure.
I feel like they always said he's the guy, he can't get it done in the clutch. He could not get them over the top. When if you look at his teammates, I mean, I love Oakley, but he really did not have a second score on his team. You finding John Starks from the CBA or whatever league he was in, it's kind of ridiculous how little. Jordan had a Hall of Famer and Scottie Pippen. Who did Patrick Ewing really have?
No, absolutely, and I talk about that in the book. He didn't play with the Hall of Famer. He didn't, and you look at the history of the game, and typically it takes multiple Hall of Famers to win the championship. And he never had that guy. And Part of it was Patrick's personality. He was a bit standoffish. He was kind of, he was almost like a reluctant superstar. Some guys love it. A guy from his era like Charles Barkley loved the spotlight, right? Patrick didn't really like it. He kind of just wanted to play basketball. But when you're a 7-foot superstar playing in New York City for the Knicks, there's an enormous spotlight on you. And he didn't really like that very well. I don't think he handled it as well as he could have. I think the media portrayed him somewhat negatively because of that, and I think fans saw him somewhat negatively because of that.
It's almost. I think people complain so much about the New York media, but I think that's almost a situation where you had a team that was so good for so long, a player, Hall of Fame player, who was possibly the greatest player in Knicks history, and throughout the time he was here, the team was just underappreciated by the media. The media gave him more crap than they really gave him. You feel like not that it matters that much, but you feel like the media should have portrayed Patrick Ewing in the light that the media portrayed Derek Jeter for the Yankees. Like, they kind of always treated him like he was a star that couldn't get, like he was an underperforming star the whole time he was here.
Yeah, I think a lot of that was his background, the expectations when he came in. I mean, Patrick was, when they drafted, it was the first draft lottery in 1985.
Yeah,
and the Knicks won, of course. And he was touted as the next Bill Russell. I mean, he was the biggest prospect to come into the league probably since Kareem. And so he came, the expectations were this guy is going to win multiple championships. And that's a lot to put on a guy. And ultimately were unrealistic expectations. And so I think his whole career was kind of played, behind the shadow of those expectations.
Would you say in your rankings of all-time great Knicks, do you put him ahead of the all-time? Like, do you put him number one for all-time greatest Knicks? You put Reed up there. Who do you put up?
It's tough. So to me, the top three, you have Willis Reed, Walt Frazier, and Patrick.
Which is a pretty. I think most people would agree that being the top three. Yeah. Yeah,
and now I mean, if you look at who had the best overall career, you'd say Patrick, just cumulative numbers and was dominant for a longer period of time than Frazier, and definitely Reed, who injuries ended his career relatively young. But I think those guys were better at their peaks. Willis Reed won an MVP. He won 2 Finals MVPs. Walt Frazier put up 36 points, 19 assists, 7 rebounds in Game 7 of the NBA Finals. I think at their best, those guys were better than him. So I would probably go with Reed. But there's a strong argument for Patrick. He's certainly right there.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. I mean, like, it's career versus the peak. I also think you look at those guys, they won titles, obviously, which is huge, but they also had a much better just supporting cast. When Patrick Ewing had to kind of get it done, how did the Knicks, like, how could Patrick Ewing's number 2 really be John Starks? I mean, nothing against John Starks, but isn't it amazing they could not assemble like a better just number 2 scorer next to him?
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of the shame of it is they finally, I think they kind of did towards the end, but he was breaking down. Like that 99 team when you had Sprewell and who was phenomenal that year, and Houston and Camby and Larry Johnson. That team, if Patrick had been 5 years younger, of course Patrick didn't even play in the finals that year because he had a partial tear in his Achilles. He was breaking down. He was old at that point. He was 36, 37, something like that. So, if he had that supporting cast when he was, say, 30, I think there's a very good chance he would have won at least one championship.
No, I mean, and
but
you're
right.
Like,
for a long time, they just couldn't get that guy.
it's crazy how they added all those guys at the end of his career, and that team was an awesome team also. But it would have been so cool to see those guys play with Ewing, a 32-year-old Ewing or a 30-year-old Ewing, when he's kind of in his prime. Like that would have made just a dominant team. Did you? So did your book? And I have not read your book. But do you spend a lot of time on the draft, on the frozen envelope?
Yeah, I go into the frozen envelope. It's funny. Yeah, it's funny to me, right? Because it's just one of those things that I personally I don't believe. I don't believe in it. In the theory. And of course, the theory is that. So this was the first draft lottery. Prior to that, you had a problem. Prior to 1985, they used to flip a coin between the teams with the two worst records would flip a coin to see who had the first pick. And after the worst two teams, it went in inverse order of your record. So the team with the third worst record would pick third. The fourth worst record would pick fourth. There was no lottery system. But you had people tanking, and in 1984, it was for Olajuwon. Teams were throwing games to try and get into that coin flip to get Akeem Olajuwon. And the NBA was concerned about it. They thought it was bad for competition. They thought it was bad for their image. And so they instituted this lottery. And the theory, of course, goes that New York is, the biggest market in the country. The NBA's television contract was expiring. And so they were looking for a new big television deal. And having this once-in-a-generation talent in your biggest market would certainly seem to help. So a lot of people jumped to the conclusion that that it was fixed. The frozen envelope theory is all of the teams that didn't make the playoffs, their logo was placed into an envelope, which was picked out of a canister, a hopper. And the theory is that the league froze the Knicks envelope so the person picking the envelopes would feel that one was cold and not pick it out until last. And it's a fascinating theory. It's the kind of thing that, David Stern denied till his death. I spoke to Dave DeBusschere, was the Knicks GM at the time. And he's of course passed away years ago from a heart attack. I spoke to his son, Peter, about it. He said, if my father ever knew anything about it, he never told me. And he's pretty sure his father never knew anything about any frozen envelope. There's no evidence anywhere to suggest that it did exist. But it's one of those conspiracy theories that, by its nature, you can't disprove it either. So till the end of time, people will be wondering if the NBA froze the envelope.
Do you know, or I guess in your research, did you figure out where they came up? Because the draft being fixed and the envelope being frozen, one does not follow to the other. If you told me the draft is fixed, I'm not going to assume they froze an envelope. How did that actual theory come about?
That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that. I don't know who originated the frozen envelope theory. There were other theories that the envelope was, messed with in different ways, that it was turned backwards or upside down in the hopper, or there was a theory that like the corner of it was bent to let the person know,
right?
Different ways of letting the person know that this is the Knicks envelope, don't pick it. But I don't know who specifically came up with the frozen envelope theory.
Would you say it's on the NBA? It's just unfair the NBA doesn't freeze envelopes for the Knicks more often?
Yes, I think it's funny. I think, and it seems now like every year, whoever wins, there are these theorists on, I see on Twitter, and the crazy Twitter sphere, people speculating that it was fixed for this reason or that reason, or I don't know. There's always a million reasons why people would fix it, but yeah, I'm not clear on why the NBA hasn't fixed it for the Knicks since.
Yeah, I don't love conspiracies, but with the NBA draft lottery, some years I'm like, Cleveland won it 3 out of 4 years in a row, especially the year LeBron was going to come back. Like those, like the there's so many storylines where you're like, well, this just fits a nice narrative with this team winning. At the same time, the NBA, which is trying to be popular internationally, and just you would think they would not want their biggest or second biggest market, depending on how you look at LA versus New York, one of the biggest markets to be a goddamn dumpster fire for the last 20 years. You think in just 1 year they'd be like, take Zion, please be a good organization. Just take the number one pick and figure this crap out. You're an absolute embarrassment. You'd think they would do something to help the Knicks. Fix the goddamn NBA. Fix the goddamn draft for the Knicks, please. It's just frustrating. With the Knicks. Anyway, let's go back to the fun era. Tell me what.
Yeah.
I was going to ask you what player, I guess of the whole era, besides Ewing, besides the bigger name players, what lesser known player, who was your favorite role player on those teams?
That's a good question. Random guy that I liked was Anthony Bonner.
Okay.
Just because he brought it. He brought the energy. He didn't have much skill at all. I mean, he couldn't shoot for his life. He couldn't really dribble. But he defended, and he worked his butt off, and he just played hard.
So going the opposite of totally, Bonner was a good player. For guys that had a lot of skills and just were disappointments, what the hell was wrong with Charles Smith? Why did he not work out?
Yeah, I know, right? I think, he was a bad fit for a few reasons. One, he got the dreaded soft label. People label him soft. There's not a worse word in sports, but he was, to say it more kindly, I guess he was a finesse player. He was big. He was 6'10", but he was more finesse, athleticism. He didn't like to mix it up physically, and so he kind of didn't fit into what they were doing. I have stories in the book where they tried to toughen him up. And, I think when they got him, Riley really viewed him as another kind of dominant post player. And that wasn't his game, and it wasn't his personality. And then on top of that, because they had Oakley and Mason, they played Smith predominantly at small forward, and he wasn't comfortable there. Certainly defensively, he was guarding, Scottie Pippen types. He was guarding guys who were much smaller, quicker, more athletic. And offensively, he liked to operate more closer to the paint. And a lot of times he was out 15, 18 feet, spreading the floor and kind of giving room for Ewing to work. And so I think both his game and his personality were a bad fit for New York.
I don't want to give too much away from your book, because everyone should go on and buy your book, because it'll just be a very fun read for any Knicks fan. But let me ask you, can you share one of the stories about how the Knicks tried to toughen Charles Smith up?
Yeah. It started Smith's first training camp with the team. One of his first practices, he went to the basket, and Oakley gave him a serious elbow to the mouth, to the jaw, and actually knocked one of Smith's teeth out. Smith picked it up off the floor and ran out of the gym. I talked to that guy, Lewis Jeter, who is an undrafted rookie trying to make the team, and he said to me, there was no doubt in his mind. It was a message from Oakley, like, you better come strong or don't come at all. There's a
little known fact. Just to interrupt you, a little known fact. The first time we did the podcast together, Jay knocked my tooth out. He would say, "You come strong, Mark, or else we're not doing the show together."
True story.
Jay sounds like that kind of guy. Yeah.
Sorry. Go on.
There's another great story. Actually, Smith was injured. He had a knee problem. By the way, that was another problem. He had a chronic a chronic condition with his knees that I think kind of slowed him down. But he was injured and thought he was ready to play. I think told the training staff he was ready to play, and then after practice his knee swelled up, decided he couldn't play. He came into the locker room, and Riley was suspicious as to whether he really was hurt, or really was hurt enough that he couldn't play. So Smith comes to the locker room, and he's wearing a nice wool suit, and this is before the game, and Riley's writing on the chalkboard. He turns around, he looks at Smith, he says, "Charles, if I said to you, I need 1 minute from you tonight. It's game 7 of the NBA Finals, and I need just 1 minute from you. Can you give it to me?" And Smith said, "Sure, yeah, coach." And Riley turned around and started writing the board a little more, and he turned back around and looked at Smith and said, "Then what the F are you doing in that suit?"
That's awesome.
So yeah, there were a few different ways, and this is in front of the whole team too, in the locker room.
That's pretty funny.
I don't know the language policy. I don't want to say the whole.
Oh, that's fine. Whatever. I imagine that happens today. That'd be a huge story. They're like, and the NBA the players' union would file a grievance. You can't talk to us like that. He's injured. Like, yeah, I don't know. Seems like a better era when coaches are like, you're not. And like, obviously, I don't want a guy to play when he's injured, but I don't know. That's a pretty cool story. Would you say Charles Smith was the most disappointing player of that era?
Definitely. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't think it's close.
So let's move on to another player that I really loved, Charles Oakley. So what? I guess. Do you remember the Oakley trade and the set? Like, were you excited about the trade? Not so excited because it was a big move.
Yeah, it was. I talked to Dave Checketts, who was the Garden president then, and he said, he'd been with the Knicks for almost 10 years then, and said that was the hardest trade he ever had to make, just because Oakley meant so much to the team. I was sad, even apart from like analyzing it from a basketball standpoint, just personally, I was sad. Oak had been there, kind of my whole fandom, and I was such a big fan of his that I was sad to see him go. I don't remember exactly how I felt as from a basketball standpoint.
Oh, sorry. I meant when they traded Bill Cartwright to get him. It was a big deal at that time.
Oh, to get.
Yeah, because it was a big. I feel like that trade worked out really well for both teams. But it was one of those things where like the Knicks gave up a lot to get him.
Yeah. It was. I mean, you nailed it. It was one of those. It was one of those trades that really works out for both teams. It was just based on personnel, right? I mean, the Knicks had an all-star center in Patrick Ewing, and Cartwright had been relegated to a backup and was unhappy. And they had tried early in Patrick's career playing Cartwright and Ewing together, but didn't work out very well. And so it made sense from that point. Chicago needed a center. And Horace Grant, this was after Horace Grant's rookie year, they were really, really impressed with Horace Grant. And it was more, you throw around the term positionless basketball now. Back then, it was very much guys were slotted into spots. And Horace Grant and Charles Oakley were very much power forwards. And so they felt Oak was somewhat expendable because they felt so highly of Grant, and they really needed a center. So it worked out for both teams. The Knicks needed a power forward. They didn't need Cartwright, and the Bulls needed a center, and they didn't need Oak as much.
Yeah. It definitely, I would say if you're going to say the second best player of that era, I would say it was Oakley. He was, and as much as I love Patrick, Oakley was the one guy, he was kind of the heart and soul of the team. The guy, like, just because he was the era. He was that tough guy who would give no one came to the Garden and tried to drive to the basket without worrying about Oakley.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, a lot of guys use those very words that some of his teammates say. Oak was the heart and soul of that team. And I mean, for me personally, with all the craziness that's gone on with the Knicks and Madison Square Garden the last 20 or so years, I don't let any moment bother me more than the Oakley incident at Madison Square Garden, because he was a warrior for that franchise for 10 years and so beloved by the fans, and to see him get thrown out like that was just very upsetting. You know, you talked about Jeter before. Obviously, he wasn't the player Jeter was, but I don't know, say Bernie Williams, getting thrown out of Yankee Stadium. Like, it's crazy to think about.
I mean, Patrick Ewing can't get a goddamn job with the Knicks. The Knicks will look at anyone else to be a coach but Patrick Ewing. Charles Oakley, another great from the 90s. The owner goes on the radio to call him a drunk. It's unbelievable how little this current team, or the current has values in the 90s Knicks. You would think they would try to surround themselves in everything 90s Knicks to kind of get some nostalgia going and get the fans thinking about good times as opposed to the crap they're playing with now.
Yeah, I mean, they have somewhat. I mean, I will say, Starks works for the team in public relations, and Larry Johnson does some stuff for the team. Allen Houston is assistant general manager, so there's some of that. But I agree with you that I mean, Ewing and Oakley were the two most important figures of that era, and both are essentially not welcome to different levels. I mean, there's not, Ewing hasn't been kicked out of the place, but I agree. Both of those guys haven't been shown the proper respect.
Do you think the Knicks should have given Patrick Ewing a shot at coaching?
I don't know. I mean, I think they should have given him serious consideration. It's coaching is tough, man. I mean, there are 30 jobs, and there are a lot of really intelligent basketball people and really qualified people, and Patrick was one of those, right? And so I think he should have, both out of respect for his history with the team and based on his track record as a coach, should have been given serious consideration. Now, once you get in those interviews, and you have to sell yourself, and you have to kind of woo the president, the owner, and all that, and give your vision for the future of the franchise, and you have to do it well. And so, I don't know if Patrick was necessarily ever the best person for the job, but I think he should have. I think he should have been in consideration.
Yeah, it's interesting. Going on to another figure that was of them, was a little bit more of a controversial figure in some level, Latrell Sprewell. And I remember myself being, when the Knicks got Latrell, and I enjoyed watching him play, but I was not a fan of the Knicks getting Latrell because of the whole basically choking his coach in the incident. Seemed like a guy you wouldn't want to get in your team. What was your reaction when the Knicks got Latrell?
I was again a little sad because similar to the Oak trade I said before, they gave up Starks to get him, and so I was sad to see Starks go. But I thought it was a good move. I guess I just thought I kind of looked at it as he was the ultimate buy low guy, right?
Absolutely, absolutely.
He was desperate to. He was a great talent. There's no question about that. And he was desperate to repair his image and, start over and make more money. And I kind of thought, well, this guy's, he has to be on his best behavior. So it was a risk. There's no doubt about it. I mean, who knows? With a guy who, yes, he was buy low, but so was, I don't know, J.R. Ryder, for example, was a buy low guy at one time, and he stayed low. A lot of guys,
Right.
You're buy low for a reason, and sometimes you never come back up. And so it was a big risk. I thought it was worth the risk because I thought maybe he could potentially put us over the top.
I mean, obviously it worked out. He played great as a Knick. At the same time, if you told me like, I don't know, if Anthony Davis tomorrow goes out and like gets drunk and like drunk driving or just something else, that not such a bad crime, I'm gonna be like, yeah, let's buy low on him also. I I just remember
Right.
my initial reaction was not that good at the time. Being I was like, what? Now they're getting this guy. But obviously it was a good gamble. And sometimes you have to take a gamble on guys. And obviously he didn't. He never choked any of the Knicks coaches, so he couldn't have been that bad of a guy.
No, and his teammates with the Knicks at least talk about him in glowing terms. I mean, great. They say he was a great teammate, a great locker room presence. And they all liked him. He worked hard in practice. Like, I didn't hear a bad word about him. But even go back, like I spoke to Tim Hardaway just to get his perspective on like the Knicks Heat matchups, and
Yeah.
he played with Latrell for a few years in Golden State, and I asked him about Latrell. I said, "Great guy, great teammate." So
Yeah.
There were, it wasn't an isolated incident. Latrell did some other crazy things. He got in a fight with Jerome Kersey at practice with the Warriors and went out to his car and got a 2x4 and came back after him. I mean, it wasn't an isolated incident either. Yeah, I mean, there's something not quite right there. But yeah, he pulled it together in New York.
For those that don't know the whole story, so Latrell Sprewell used to be on the he was on the Warriors. There was some kind of screaming incident. PJ Carlesimo was his coach. Some reason Carlesimo was chewing Latrell Sprewell out, and Latrell responded by physically choking Carlesimo. I think they had to be pulled apart. Kind of a crazy story. It's one of the crazier stories you hear from like a practice. But yep, never choked any. There was no player on the Knicks or coach or assistant that got choked by Latrell Sprewell, so it worked out well.
That's right.
So can I ask you? It sounds like you talked to obviously a lot of people for this book, and you probably have some really amazing stories in there. Could you tell us maybe like a story that even if you're a '90s Knicks fan, you may not know a behind the scenes story?
Yeah. Let me think of. Let me try and pick a good one. There are a lot of Oakley stories for sure. I mean, to the point that like everybody I spoke to had an Oakley story, and 70% of them were about what a tough, intimidating guy he was, and 30% of them were about what a sweetheart he was. He was just the nicest guy ever. Mason, some of that was Mason as well. Similar stuff about what a mean, angry guy Mason was at times, but also did some wonderful charitable work and had a really soft side to him. And one story that I really liked, this is a short one. I spoke to Steve Masiello, is currently the basketball coach at Manhattan College, and he was a ball boy for the Knicks in the late '80s, early '90s. And he told me one of Mason's first games with the Knicks, Mason came up to Masiello right before tip-off, gave him a piece of paper with a phone number on it. He said, "This is my mother's phone number. Please call her for me. Tell her I love her and that I wish you were here." And that story just really touched me because it's like this big, bad, mean Anthony Mason was actually a real soft mama's boy.
Oh,
And I thought that was cool.
that is kind of cool. Yeah, no, Anthony Mason's a guy. If you telling me he had anger issues, I could see that. Telling me he's a mama's boy, I cannot. I don't think I'd even ask him about being a mama's. I mean, obviously, if he was still here, I would not ask him about being a mama's boy. I'd be scared to see his reaction. But he was also, the way I mentioned before, Oakley being the heart and soul of this team. Anthony Mason, in many respects, was also like, what was fun about that best the earlier teams, you had these players who were they found these off the beaten path players. You got John Starks, who played in the I think it's the CBA. and like they made him a good player in the NBA. Anthony Mason was not the most talented player by far. He had played. I think he started in the Nets, and he was on Detroit for a little bit. He didn't have much of a career before the Knicks. The Knicks found him, and the Knicks made a career for him. They got the best out of him, and that team. I guess just what I like about the '90s Knicks. One thing is that they seem to, forgetting Charles Smith, they seem to get the most out of a lot of players. There was like player development. They got guys to play hard. I wish we had more of that now. Like now we seem to get instead of the sum is greater than the whole. It's like the individual parts are probably greater than the whole now. Like you have players that have some talent, but no one can play well together.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think, if you look at the good teams now, a lot of it, there's this misconception that you have to get a lottery, you have to get the first pick in the draft or the top 2 or 3 picks to build a winner or build a really good team. And it's simply not true. Yes, teams are like that. Yes, obviously LeBron's won his championships, but look at the Raptors last year. Kawhi was like the 15th pick. Nobody on that team was. You have Lowry. Look at some of the players they developed. Pascal Siakam was a late pick. They turned him into an all-star. Guys like, Fred VanVleet, I think was second round. He's gonna make a boatload of money this summer. Same thing in Miami. They got Kendrick Nunn was a big contributor this year. My guy Duncan Robinson. I went to University of Michigan, so my Duncan Robinson guy. He was undrafted. Now he's a starter on a team in the finals. So you're 100% right. It's not, you have to find these diamonds in the rough, the Anthony Masons, the John Starks of the world, and develop them.
Yeah,
and the Knicks, you're right. The Knicks just haven't done that.
The current Heat team is a great example because like the highest pick on that team is Tyler Hero at pick 13. Bam was a 14th pick. I don't remember what Dragic is, so maybe I'm wrong. But I think Dragic was a late pick also, and he's obviously a lot older. It's nice to. It's great to have number 1 picks and be able to get like a LeBron or get a top player in the draft. But it's just fun to actually be able to like. The Knicks have been drafting for a long time. It's not their draft position that's held them back; it's their ability to like spot the right talent and develop talent. Moving forward for a second, the current team. What's your view on the current team? Like, what's your path for them to actually be good?
Yeah.
I stumped you.
Yeah, right.
It's not fair asking impossible questions.
And so I actually think it's important to maintain flexibility. I think that's the most important thing because I think you can build through free agency. The Lakers, obviously, they signed LeBron, and then they traded a ton of assets for Anthony Davis. That's one way to do it. Or you can build through the draft, and then kind of like the Nets have. And then the Nets got a few solid young pieces, and Durant and Kyrie looked at that and said, you know what? There's a supporting cast in place there. We could go there and win. Of course, you could land a top pick and get a superstar. I think for the Knicks, I think they're still filling things out a little bit. What exactly do we have here? Who exactly is R.J. Barrett? What is Mitch Robinson's ceiling? Can Knox and Ntilikina be rotation players? But I think I'd like them to bring in a little experience, a little veteran experience, because I think that's important for development. And I think we've lost that in the NBA to an extent as guys are, in the one and done era now. You have a lot of guys in the league who are 19, 20, 21 years old, and a lot fewer guys, a lot fewer Udonis Haslams, who clearly has a greater value to that franchise because he hasn't played meaningful basketball in I don't know how many years, but they keep him around. You need guys like that.
Let me ask you
locker room presence too, though. Yeah, go ahead.
Let me ask you 5 questions. Just 5 questions about this Knicks team and going forward. 1, Fred VanVleet is going to cost a lot of money. Do you think you go all in for him? You're going to pay him $20-25 million a year. FanFleet, would you back the truck up to get him here?
No, because
Okay.
I don't think he's good enough to make the guys around him better.
Okay, fair enough. What about Chris Paul? Do you trade? Chris Paul's going to cost draft picks. Do you trade draft picks to get Chris Paul?
Depends how many. I'm more on board with Paul because I think he can. I think he would do wonders for RJ Barrett in particular and some of the other guys. You don't want to give up too much, right?
Yeah, I think he's too old, and giving up draft picks at this point it's not gonna take us forward. But I respect Chris Paul's amazing. He would make everyone better.
Yeah.
I wish he would come here for cheap, and he's not going to. I don't care about the salary cap figure. I care about what they're giving up. So RJ Barrett, do you think RJ Barrett can make the All-Star team? And not obviously this iteration of him. Does he have the potential to get there? Do you see the next 5 years RJ Barrett becoming the player that's borderline All-Star?
I do, and I don't put me on in 5 years and play back the tape. I'm not 100%. But if you put a gun to my head and I have to choose, yes, I do. I think RJ Barrett is. I think Jimmy Butler is a decent comparison for RJ Barrett. I think that would be like kind of his ceiling, because he gets to the basket, and he can play physically, and he gets to the basket, and he'll get to the foul line. The shot is a question mark. But yes, I do think he'll be borderline All-Star.
I'm pretty fine with if your ceiling for him is a guy that just scored 40 points and had a triple-double in the NBA Finals and put a team on its back to win a game. Yeah. Totally fine with that being your ceiling. Fourth question.
That's the best case scenario.
That would be amazing. Kevin Knox, does he have an NBA? Is Kevin Knox an NBA player?
I don't think so.
Yeah.
I don't think, and I think honestly it's mental more than physical. I don't think he has. I don't know. I mean, maybe he could carve out a niche as kind of just a shooter, a spot up shooter, but I don't think he has that aggressiveness, that assertiveness. I don't like to use the word soft, but I think he is kind of soft.
Are you calling him Charles Smith without the talents?
No. but in his defense, man, he's been in the league 2 years, and it's like it's just been 2 years of roster turnover and changing coaches and uncertainty and undefined roles, and it's been just a terrible atmosphere to develop as a player, really. So I mean, I wouldn't write him off yet. I wouldn't give up on him yet, but I don't think he's a player.
Okay, and last question: the biggest move the Knicks have made is really bringing in Tibbs. Is Tibbs the guy? Is Thibodeau the right coach for this team going forward?
I think he is, but I think with the caveat being that what Tibbs does is relatively irrelevant compared to the personnel they bring in. Right? I mean, I think he's a good hire. I think he's a good coach. I think he'll get them to work hard and compete, and he'll develop young players. But they have to bring in the right players.
Yeah, fair point. Fair point. Well, hopefully your being on the show tonight kicks off the new 90s era for the Knicks, and we can have 10 more years here where it's going to be awesome again, because it's been a tough time since that era ended. But everyone out there should go out and buy Paul's book. Just read about the 90s Knicks, read about the glory days of the Knicks. It is so much fun to just talk and read about. Yeah. Jay, you want to add something?
Yeah, and you spoke to almost 100 different people for the book too. That must have been quite the endeavor to take on. I'm impressed with that.
Yeah, thanks. It was a lot of work, but it was fun.
How long
long
did it
did it
take to do all that? Like, how long was this book in the works?
The whole process, 2.5 years, about.
Oh wow.
And I wasn't doing interviews that whole time. I kind of did like initial research, and then jumped into interviews for a while. So I wasn't interviewing like consistently for that time period, but the whole process, about 2.5 years.
Who was your favorite? I mean, nothing against everyone else. I'm sure everybody you talked to was great to talk to, but who was your favorite person to talk to?
Yeah. Two kinds of favorites. Oakley and Starks were great because for like the giddy 16-year-old in me, like that was great. Best interviewers, guys you wouldn't necessarily think of. The guy I mentioned before, Steve Masiello, was a ball boy, right? And just had great stories. Another guy was a guy named Bob Salmi, who was a video coordinator and assistant coach for the Knicks from the early, like 1990 until 96. And again, just great stories. It's sometimes the biggest people aren't necessarily the most open about what went on with themselves or others, or are just not good storytellers, right? Some people are just very good storytellers or have a better memory, whatever it is. So those guys, Masiello and Salmi, were great.
Awesome. So yeah, you can get the book on Amazon, and also check out Paul's podcast. It's New Book Sports on Twitter. And follow Paul on Twitter. It's at Paulie Knep, Knep.
Yeah,
That's right.
yeah. It was great having you on. It's great talking about the '90s. It's weird. As a Knicks fan, I even found like we started talking about the '90s. I found myself getting bitter about how they treated Patrick Ewing. I can't relive any era of the Knicks and be like just happy. But that was just such a fun era. And the thing is also we were spoiled then because we'd win 50 games every season. So we didn't know how special it was to win 50 games. Whereas we won 54 games.
Yes.
We won 50 games once in the last 20 years. And we're like, oh my God, remember that year we made the second round of the playoffs? Oh my God, let's do a parade.
Right. And especially for people in our age range, right? Because we came of age at that time. So we didn't know, the teams of the early 80s, the Knicks teams of the early 80s that weren't any good. We kind of, we just knew good basketball. And
right.
So we didn't know any different.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. It'd be like becoming a Spurs fan right now and having the Spurs just be mediocre for the next 10 years, not realizing, being like, wait, you mean the Spurs were good for 30 straight years? Yeah, they were really, really good for like 30 straight years. Like,
right.
Yeah, no, it was a super fun era, and whatever you could say about today's basketball being better in some respect, I don't know. I like tougher basketball. Maybe it's because I grew up then, but it seemed like a lot better basketball than this crap of like, oh my God, he touched my toe, he touched my nail, that's a foul, and guys just. I was listening to the Bill Simmons podcast, and it was Simmons and Russillo, and they're amazing. But Russillo made some comments like, how often when you're playing street ball with your friends, does someone fall over? Like, this doesn't really happen when you play. You watch the NBA, these huge individuals are just falling over these days, and you're like, okay, this is where we're coming from? Everyone's going to flop around, and we're going to pretend this is really what happened to the guy? I don't know. I like it. Like, if you're going to fall down, I want Anthony Mason to knock you down.
I'm with you, man.
All right. Well, it's been great having you on. Thank you so much. And again, everybody go out and
Thank you guys so much. As I said, I'm a fan of the show, so it's been really cool to come on and talk to you guys. Thanks so much for having me.
Awesome.
No,
it's been a pleasure.
Thank you for coming on. We hope we assume now everyone listening will buy the book. The book will rocket to #1 on Amazon. It's just an awesome book. If you're a Knicks fan, buy the book.
All right. Thanks again. We'll have you on again.
Thanks, guys. Okay.
Bye. Bye, bye, love. Goodbye, everybody. Goodbye. It's all over. Goodbye. It's time to go. This is the end. Say goodbye. You cannot go away. I'm going.